Hi everyone, I am Anonymous Traveler. Today I will talk about a meditational trigger of occult experience and the battle zone in the eternal desert of communal gravity and spiritual attack from Demiurge and his minions, including Succubus attack. Recently, I had some meditational breakthrough. I would like to share some of them, especially a protection mechanism while pursuing spiritual breakthrough seriously. Now, I have closed it, but when I had a Patreon account, some of my subscribers supported me by regular donation. Also, I have serious listeners who do practice spiritual alchemy, etc. So, I have a sense of responsibility for their well-being. So, by sharing this Gnostic insight regarding the protection mechanism will be my gift to them. By the way, not only I have shut down my Patreon account, but also my Yahoo email address that I listed on my channel a couple years ago has been dead for years already. So this channel is the only place I communicate with you all. I am telling you this because sometimes when an email account is hacked, spammer could send out a bunch of unwanted spam emails from that address, but that has nothing to do with me. So, if you received any of spam email from my dead email address, it's not from me. Now, I will discuss the trigger mechanism of occult experience from a meditational point of view. There are few exceptions, including drug use or fatal accident, etc. But in most cases, when one experiences occult phenomenon, it happens after one has experienced the middle zone or middle land. Let me explain what is this middle zone or middle land. When one is at the height of one's mental concentration, one can enter the state of Samadhi. Samadhi is a special state of mind which is completely unified and calm without outside noise or internal chatter. Samadhi can be achieved through two different paths. One is meditation, and the other is well-structured magical activities. However, I came to a conclusion that meditation is far superior than any other ritual magic. Anyway, when one's mind has entered a state of Samadhi, it is like a state where other mind activities are all disappeared and the only thing that remains is the object or focus of your concentration. I am going to explain using a meditation experience as an example. So, when mind is in Samadhi, sometimes one feels like a body is levitating, and that mind state is like being surrounded by the white cloud in the sky. In the middle of the cloud, you see a shining object of your concentration, and all the other mind activities are gone without a trace. And after spending some time in this state, the mind has to come down to the ordinary, everyday world in order to function in the world. And when the mind is leaving this particular state of Samadhi onto ordinary consciousness, it does not happen in a few seconds. It usually happens in a few minutes. And this particular time frame where your mind is in the middle between the Samadhi and regular everyday consciousness is what I call the middle zone. And if one's Samadhi goes even deeper, the entire universe disappears, but when one comes down to the ordinary everyday consciousness, one will still pass through the lower level of Samadhi. It's like climbing down a stairs. So, the Beijing mechanism is still same for average Samadhi practitioners and the advanced Samadhi practitioners. And what I realized recently is the strength of one's own occult experience is depending on how much time one spent in the middle zone. In other words, more time you spend in this middle zone, the easier access to occult phenomenon if one wishes. But I have to clarify something first. Experiencing occult phenomenon is very exciting at first, but you have to consider the scientific reproducibility. That means the occult phenomenon you have experienced must be able to repeat itself exactly in the same manner when one implements a same condition. However, that is not the case for almost every practitioner. I will use my own experience as an example. I have seen a future event in my dream. By itself, it is a meaningful occult phenomenon. However, in the grand scheme of things, this kind of ability is completely useless because it happens very rarely, and the most other dreams I have cannot predict the future event at all. This kind of a dilemma is very common for most of spiritual practitioners. If an occult phenomenon only occurs once in a while for the practitioner, then its reliability is almost zero and completely useless. However, one can increase the probability of reproducing occult phenomenon by one's will. To gradually increase this probability, one has to stay in the desert zone, or in other words, the battle zone. Let me explain what exactly is this desert zone or battle zone. The middle zone is supposed to be a temporary mental state. However, one can force himself to stay in the middle zone with a certain technique. When one is forcefully staying in the middle zone, the zone is turning into a very dry and hostile place, and that's why I call it the desert battle zone. Also, in this particular state, the force of the evil creator god Demiurge and his minions start attacking you. And the longer you can hold your ground fighting against this evil force, the supernatural power or Gnostic spiritual insight increases. But this technique requires some sacrifice. The key to open this state is total elimination of all the physical pressures, including sex and tasty food, etc. And this one really requires utter and complete giving up. Human mind is lazy and self-righteous, and one is usually interpreting everything for his or her own convenience in order to make himself or herself feel good. However, if one's giving up of physical pressure is not complete, one cannot stay and fight back in the desert battle zone. There is no other way around this. And this process requires no gap in between. If you are a recluse who live in a desert or deep in the mountain, it could be easier. However, if one is a layman who needs to function as an ordinary layman here and there, then he or she requires very skillful approach. That means when you get off this state, in order to go grocery shopping or working your day job, you have to keep on practicing. That means, let's say you decided to spend 2 years in the desert battle zone, then you need to refrain from any sexual pressure or taste-related pressure or 5 sense-related pressures for 2 entire years, even when you are not meditating. And also, this practice requires a total disengagement from other people. For example, if you are in a grocery store, do not look at people, especially the opposite sex. Also, if you have to work, then remove any of energy interaction with a person sitting across the table. Just function as a professional, but stay away from any energy interaction with the people you are interacting with. You have to learn and master the art of being in a state of non-involvement while you are interacting at work or at a grocery store or at a bank, etc. I know it is tough, but if you are a lay person and would like to go for a very advanced level of spiritual development, then there is no choice here. And also, while in the desert, other than these activities you cannot avoid, one has to refrain from entertainment as well. In other words, one has to be completely absorbed in this dry and difficult mental zone called the desert battle zone 24/7. Then it will click. You will experience directly when it clicks and opening the door to the spiritual desert battle zone. This place is where a true, meaningful progress is being made. However, I have to clarify something here. 99% of people who call themselves as a guru or teacher are not genuine. They have never even remotely been to the spiritual desert battle zone. But there are very few people who successfully did spend quite a long time in the battle zone. However, some of them are very delusional in terms of assessing their own achievements. And the reason is, in the battle zone, it's like you are trying to cut down a curtain or veil with your sword. This curtain or veil is like a jail cell wall that keeps us locked up in this world of manifestation. However, when one has cut down a layer of curtain, one tends to become too arrogant and believe he or she has attained something like enlightenment. I'm sorry to bring a bad news here, but they are nowhere near the enlightenment. The jail cell wall is not just a single layer of curtain. It is comprised of many multiple layers of curtain. Unless one has cut down every single one of those curtains, one is nowhere near the enlightenment. Also, those who has cut down only several layers of curtains should not consider themselves as a teacher. That's why I consider myself as just a traveler or wanderer who's sharing a traveling tip here and there. My YouTube channel is like my traveling log. Anyway, let me explain regarding the attack from Demiurge and his minions. When one starts to spend some serious time in the middle zone by giving up all the physical pleasures, it triggers entering process into the battle zone or desert zone. It is still the middle zone, but it becomes very dry, thirsty, and hostile place, and in this zone, you begin to encounter the energy force of Demiurge and his minions literally in your face. By the way, entering and staying in the battle zone will not guarantee spiritual awakening. There are many people who entered this battle zone and spent decades over there and died of old age. Only few, very, very few, did manage to reach some really meaningful spiritual awakening in the battle zone. When you begin to see those hostile energies directly, that means you have become a target for Demiurge and his minions. And Demiurge and his minions do not like any being spending time in the desert zone or battle zone. Of course, they know only extremely few humans would make a real breakthrough in the battle zone, but still, they do not like taking any of a chance. So, they attack whoever enters the battle zone. Now, let me explain what I said about the protection mechanism. The attack from Demiurge and his minions is very real. They use both of the carrot and the stick. I have been fighting against various kinds of attacks, and out of all the carrot, and the most tempting and the dangerous carrot is Succubus. Usually, Succubus is much more attractive than human female because Succubus is taking a list of features you like about women's body. The first encounter that I had with a Succubus was when I was a young boy, and it basically triggered me to chase after girls and pursue the pleasures related to women. So I wasted a lot of my energy and the time on women. And not all the succubus are the same. There are two different types of succubus. One is a common type which interact with the human male in order to suck up their life force. They are like vampires. But there are rare type of succubus whose goal is not stealing the life force from human male, but distract him from the past that might cause prison break from this cosmic jail that we all are living in. In such case, those special succubus are acting like a minion of evil creator god Demiurge. If any human male seems to push himself on the direction of the jailbreak from this evil prison system, those special type of succubus are dispatched to make sure to distract the man and entice him to walk out of the correct spiritual path. And you might wonder why a succubus can do both. Why a succubus can distract a potential troublemaker in this cosmic jail out from the spiritual path, and also at the same time keep feeding off his spiritual energy over and over. The reason is, for a person who has been practicing for many lifetimes over and over, the spiritual protection mechanism would be developed over time. This process is basically spiritual alchemy in the highest order. Spiritual alchemy is not about making some gold. Its true goal is turning a practitioner into an avatar or symbol or manifestation of perfection itself in terms of human development. The utter perfect development of a human is to strengthen and cultivate and purify the divine spark within himself or herself. This divine spark is from the God of a manifestation, which is entirely different than the gods of all the major religions. And the second-class god, Demiurge, which is the evil one, created this universe and used the creatures to generate various tastes and flavors of existence, including his favorite, the suffering. For the evil god, suffering of humanity is like a bitter taste of chocolate. He is like a hardcore chocolate addict. He cannot be satisfied with mild flavor. He wants stronger bitter taste for this chocolate. He is always looking for stronger stimulation, and that's why he enjoys human suffering so much. However, human has a tiny but distinctive divine spark within. It is so tiny, but if one is determined to cultivate it, one can increase it over many lifetimes. And when one has cultivated enough of this divine spark from the God of a manifestation, it somehow changes that person. If I compare that person to material substance, it's like that person is becoming a pure material that reflects the spark or lightning of the God of a manifestation. So, in terms of alchemy, that person is not making a material gold, but turning himself into a medium of a divine spark from the God of a manifestation. And this fully cultivated divine spark is what protects the one from the attack of Demiurge and his minions. By the way, my recent encounter with this new succubus was really something else. It was like a combination of all the attractive female figures on steroid. On top of that, it has a very peculiar voice that I used to be completely enchanted. I am very sensitive to sound and the voice, and I get totally excited by certain female voice. And that succubus was manifesting that voice to the utmost perfection. So its intention was clear that it was sent out to my bed in order to make me give up the practice of celibacy. And it was sitting on my body, so I had to push it away forcefully. So I survived this without falling back to sense pressure. Also, in order to fully exercise the divine spark within us, one must cultivate human virtues. This has nothing to do with morality or ethics. It's purely a matter of physics. Unless one purifies oneself fully, one cannot turn himself into an electric conductor for the divine spark. Impure and compromised morality is like an impure material, and it cannot be used as a conductor for the divine spark. There are many higher qualities of a human that we call virtues, and in order to become a fully functioning conductor, one must cultivate all the virtues. When this person enters the desert battle zone, nobody can touch him, even the Demiurge himself. However, I don't have such development. In terms of the virtues, I have a lot of shortcomings. So, in order to survive the desert battle zone, I developed my own strategy. That is the parts of the sword that reflect only one side of the divine spark, yet extremely sharp and brilliant manner. Again, those who truly deserve respect are the ones who developed all the human virtues to almost, and they are like representing all the aspect of the divine spark. Those people can be considered as truly noble ones and teachers. However, I only have one virtue that I cultivated to the perfection, and that is the virtue of discipline. For me, discipline can be replaced with other words such as never give in attitude or never surrender attitude. And that is the only virtue that I developed to the extreme over the many painful lifetimes. I practiced and cultivated this particular virtue in everyday life as a layperson and also in the spiritual life. For example, before my autoimmune disease got worse, I used to have a full-time job. And in order to practice meditation, I always got up before 3 o'clock in the morning. And I never missed a single day. Every single day, I got up before 3 o'clock to practice. This is just one of many of my practices to strengthen my discipline. And I have practiced each and every single one of my various practices to the utmost. And throughout all these practices, and also from my previous lifetime's practices as well, I finally completed a training of discipline. I can honestly say I have never met any human being more disciplined than me. So, although I have a lot of shortcomings on other human virtues, at least I perfected one human virtue. That means I cannot reflect all the aspects of a divine spark, but at least I can reflect one particular aspect, which is discipline, and I shaped it into the spiritual sword in the battle zone. And this sword is my choice of a weapon to defend myself against the evil god and his minions. I tried many experiments to get in and out of this desert battle zone, where some serious spiritual workings and battles are conducted. One can spend his time in the middle zone to experience occult phenomenon or spiritual visions, but without entering the battle zone, one cannot truly fulfill the task. And in order to stay and fight back in the battle zone, one has to give up all the sense pressures. This is a direct trigger that allows a person who is able to reach Samadhi into the desert battle zone. So I gave up everything related to physical sense pressures. Then it triggered a transformation of middle zone into the desert battle zone. Normally, anyone with incomplete virtue development would get crushed by Demiurge and his minions in this zone. However, although I have one single virtue, that is discipline, at least I perfected it and made it into a very sharp and shining sword, and because of that, I am able to survive in the battle zone. This sword is like a lightning reflecting the divine spark in its most ferocious aspect, and Demiurge and his minions are afraid of such lightning. And this became my protective mechanism in the battle zone. So if anyone is interested in this particular path into the desert battle zone, I suggest you develop at least one virtue to the utmost extreme to protect himself or herself. And I believe the best virtue for that purpose is discipline. Some other virtues can cause a lot of a problem. For example, if you choose generosity as your virtue, many people will try to take advantage of you. Unconditional generosity can cause some serious problem if one really tries to push it to the extreme. So, for the practicality, I chose discipline because it doesn't have such a complication. However, this virtue has its downside as well. It requires a serious training in the refrain from desire. Out of all the human virtues, discipline is the one that requires the biggest sacrifice in terms of human pleasures. However, still, it is the most practical virtue in our current time. So, that is my survival technique during the stay in the desert battle zone. And once I entered the desert battle zone, I realized some changes. Although I am very, very far from finishing the battle, there has been some changes in my psychic faculties. For example, now if I pay attention to a person walking very, very far ahead of me, I can make that person move his head to my direction no matter how far that person's location is. There are some other changes, but I am not going to talk about it today. So, here is my report from the desert battle zone. Again, I just consider myself as a traveler or wanderer. So, the tip that I share should be considered as just a simple traveling tip. I am not a teacher because my virtues other than discipline are still poor. And today's video has been very personal tip based on my recent experience. By the way, I had to clarify one thing. There are big difference between those who cut down several layers of cottons in the desert battle zone and those who cut down the entire layers of cottons. And in order to cut down the entire layers of cotton, one has to give up entire spectrum of physical pressures for good. So it's not like giving up physical pressure for 2 years or 20 years or even 20 lifetimes. If one is really determined to cut down every single layer of the cotton in the desert battle zone, one has to give them up for good. However, I will say this much. There are mental pressures far greater than physical pressures. When one reaches to a higher level of spiritual development, one can experience those higher pressures directly. However, even when one started to cherish mental pleasures more than physical pleasures, there will be occasional moments of physical itching. However, this itching is not permanent. I know for most people, giving up physical pleasure is a terrible idea, but actually, there are much greater pleasures available. So in the end, giving up physical pleasure would improve your quality of life. Thanks for listening and all the best.